Thank you for watching video number 4 of Papaw's Garden Supply. This is a video on transplanting out into the garden as well as preparation of the beds to start with. Now, what I want to show you first is my temporary raised beds. If we look over here, it looks like that's a raised bed, but actually it's not. I dig the walkways out so that I don't get any compaction around the plants. So it looks like I've got a raised bed, but actually I've got more of a sunken walkway. This does a couple of things. First of all, we get hard rains and in the spring, then the excess water goes into that walkway and it doesn't drown the plants. A second thing that it does is that it makes for a walkway that you're always going to use. Consequently, you don't compact around the plants, which is very, very important. And I found that this works really, really well. It's a 42-inch wide row, and I use this on everything. I don't care whether it's green beans or tomatoes or whatever. And you'll see that as time goes on, I do more videos. So essentially, I work the ground, I take a shovel and I dig down about 6 inches and I make a walkway. I pile it onto the row and then I level it off and I'm ready to go. Now, let's talk about fertilizer for a second. One of the things that is important about growing transplants is that they, and even like carrots and other small seeded vegetables, is they need a little bit of phosphorus, which is the second number in the analysis of fertilizer, NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, I used this material here because it is an organic source. I believe it maybe come from chickens. It smells like that. And what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of that in the hole, transplant hole, or I will sprinkle it on top of the ground. In fact, I did that on these carrots over here, this very first row. I'll explain something about compaction and hard rains here in a second. Second thing, as far as fertilizer, is that I need a nitrogen source, especially for the cabbage, broccoli, and the onions in particular. Again, this is a lawn fertilizer. It has no chemicals in it. This is an organic source. Again, I think it's probably got some kind of chicken material in it. And I use that both in a transplant hole and on top of the ground, especially onions that I'll transplant back there. I've already sprinkled that on top of the soil. It's going to rain tonight and tomorrow, so that's going to soak in. Onions are shallow seeded, shallow rooted, so they need the nitrogen on fairly close to the top of the ground, not down in a hole. Okay, let's talk about rains and compaction. Now, I'm fortunate to have a sandy loam soil. It's very easy to tell. It dries out quick though in the summertime. But it can even crust. It can actually have a little hard layer for seedlings to not come up through. And what happened here over the last several days, we've had not only freezes and frost, but we've had some extremely hard rains. And that compacts that top layer of soil. So when the little plants try to come up, it breaks their little necks, so to speak, and then they die. So one of the ways that you can get around that, and we'll just come over here and I'll show you. This bed here is in carrots, and carrots take 2 to 3 weeks to come up, so you're not going to see any of those yet. But if you look over here, you see some lettuce just starting to come up in just a few spots. Now, the reason it's not even is because of the fact that we had these hard rains and there's just a little bit of compaction. See how this cracks? So what we're going to do is we're just going to take and just press the soil with the rake ever so gently, not to really disturb anything, but just to break it just a little bit, just like that. And after a while I'll do all of these beds this way, and the gentle rains we'll have tonight will soften that soil up and everything should come through. Same way with this, I'll do it the same way. I just go in and just break the ground ever so slightly, ever so gently. Now, one of the things that I've had people ask me, both from the videos and from my business, papawsgarden.com, is that in planting like this, I've got lettuce sown 42 inches wide by roughly 3 feet long. I've got mustard greens, I've got turnips, I've got several different salad green plants all up and down this bed. And the reason I've done that, and the way to do it, is to take and just sow it on top of the ground, because lettuce needs light in order to germinate. It cannot be but just barely under the soil surface. So I gently sprinkle it around, and then I just take the rake and just rake it in ever so gently, and then I press it down to make it firm so you have good soil to seed contact. Water it, and that's it. And then it'll come up. It may come up a little hit and miss at first if you have hard grains afterwards, but it will come up. If you have to interseed a little bit later, you got some bare spots, it's not a big deal. But a solid bed of lettuce like this has no weeds in it to speak of, and you just cut it with a pair of scissors, and it comes back. It'll come back about 3 times. You'll have more lettuce, salad greens, and you know what to do with it. Now, let's go over here to the large seeded plants. One of the things that we did, this is broccoli right here, and I'm going to show you how that I do it. I dig a hole about 1 foot deep, and I do that to make sure the soil is loose, you know, down to the subsoil. The second thing I do is this broccoli and a cabbage, because they're transplants, they also need a nitrogen source, and I like to have a deep nitrogen source that's not going to go away. A lot of the commercial fertilizers will tend to leach out into the subsoil, and it's not going to, by the time the broccoli needs it, they're not going to get it. So I take alfalfa pellets, a handful, and I just put them in a hole. I put a little bit of that other fertilizer, especially the phosphorus, and I fill this hole full of water. Another way you can do it is to take a transplant solution, if you like that method. I use a fish emulsion, and then a little Miracle Grow, maybe a teaspoon of that in a gallon of water, maybe a tablespoon of the fish emulsion. Shake that up, and then I'll just pour that in the hole. And that gives me some very, very quick nutrients for the plant. Now, here is an Arcadia broccoli plant. If you don't be concerned about yellow leaves, the yellow bottom leaves are normal. As the new leaves grow up, the old leaves die. That's just the way it is. I don't worry about it. You'll see that you get some root bound roots here, and one of the things you got to do is you got to break them up. So I'll just break these out like that, and then I'll just grab this, because you don't want to break the terminal bud. You can break some of the leaves, you just don't want to break the top. Grab this, set that down, make sure it's good and wet. I use my hory knife, and I just do this. That's it. That's literally all there is to it. Now, I like to mulch it with grass clippings and leaves, and I will do that, but not right now. It's still too cool. You would make the ground continue to be too cool. So I'll wait another 2-3 weeks till it's May, till the soil warms up a bit, and then I'll mulch all around these plants, and I'll put newspapers down these rows, put some more mulch on top of that, and then I literally do not weed the rest of the year. I just don't. I don't have time for that. So that's 20 broccoli plants, and then over here I've got my cabbage, and I think there's 18 of those. I space the broccoli roughly 1.5 foot apart, and I do the cabbage as well. One of the things that I found that you can do to reduce the little white worms, which is the cabbage moth, from getting around these plants, is to take onion sets and plant them all around here. And what that does and it doesn't work every year, but it works most years for me, is that I'll put these all up and down through here. That's where I put most of my onions. And those onions come up, they give off a scent. And the cabbage moths smell the onions over the cabbage and the broccoli, and they tend not to light on it and bother the cabbage and broccoli in most years. But that's a little trick I've learned, and plus it allows these onions to come up in between the cabbage, and it just utilizes more space. Now, one last thing we want to talk about is this here, and we'll finish with the onions, setting those. Some people have asked me about the having this bundle that I sell that's 128 plants you can grow at one time. Sounds like a lot, but here's the thing. I like to put beets, kohlrabi, collard greens, and onions in those flats and grow them. Well, there's 32 beets, there's 32 kohlrabi, there's 32 collard greens, and then I've got probably a few hundred onions. So it doesn't take very long before, you know, it sounds like a lot, but this is a 42-inch by a 23-foot row. But I've got everything perfectly spaced, and I'm going to grow a tremendous amount of food in a little area. So I space the beets roughly 6 inches apart. The kohlrabi, I go roughly 4 inches apart, and you can see these little dudes. That's what the kohlrabi looks like. It's got the little bulb already started. Again, I break the root up and I just plant it. Make sure the terminal top bud is not covered up. That's it. Now we'll go, let me get my hori knife, and we'll do a few onions. These are candy onions grown from seed. If you take a look at them, now I'm going to just break the tops off. That helps them in the wind. But if you look at these plants, these are from seed. They look great. You break them apart. That's and what I'm going to do, I don't want to plant them very deep, just like that. But I'm going to space these roughly 6 inches apart, and I've already sprinkled some of that high nitrogen fertilizer on top of the ground. That way tonight when it rains, that will soak into the top of the soil, and that's all these little plants are going to need. And that is how I do it. I do not plant single rows. I haven't done that in almost 30 years, because I found that these wide rows allow for better utilization of the space. And I can plant in 1,200 square feet what we used to plant when I was a kid in a half acre. Now, I'll finish this. There we go. We'll do these here in a second. Visit my website, papawsgarden.com. I've got all the different products there. I do want to say things have been very hectic and busy. If it shows that I have a zero inventory on something, don't worry about it. I just don't want to be able to have a back order. So just check back the next day. Usually I have everything in stock. Thank you for watching, and have a great gardening season.